Hello and welcome to the Real Estate, Wine, and More podcast. And yes, we are finally back from a month's hiatus. I have missed you, and I hope you have missed me too. I'm your host, Howard Fletcher. I'm a licensed realtor in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. I'm a journalist, and I am also now a seller of new and pre-owned Lexus vehicles at Lexus of Rockville. That's a whole nother story, and I will get to that later. But right now, I'd like to get to an interview I had last week with the sales director of Boxwood Estate Winery in Middleburg, Virginia. Her name is Jessica Chivers-Wilson, and I know you will find her to be as interesting and as informative as I did. Yeah, she's a charming lady. We visited the winery. Well, I visited the winery with my partner Joan last week, and we had our usual wonderful time in the town of Middleburg and at Boxwood Estate Winery. Middleburg is the epicenter of Virginia horse country, but because of the efforts and skills of winemakers at Boxwood and a few others, it has become a haven for wine connoisseurs and wine lovers throughout the world. As listeners of this podcast know, I like to record these interviews in the middle of the action at the winery, so if you hear any background noise, it's just the good folks at Boxwood making the magic happen. So with no further ado, here's my conversation with Jessica Chivers-Wilson. This is episode 8, Boxwood Estate Winery, Winemaking in Virginia Horse Country. Okay, I'm in lovely Middleburg, Virginia. Drove down here with Joan. Took about, we came from Vienna, Virginia. I live in Silver Spring. Yep. Middleburg's about 45 minutes, I would say, from D.C. Mm-hmm. It's a lovely drive, lovely little town. And I'm here at Boxwood Winery.
Boxwood Estate Winery?
Boxwood Estate Winery.
We like to say estate because all of our grapes are estate grown.
Fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I'm with Jessica Chivers-Wilson.
Yep.
And Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Jessica, what do you do here at Boxwood?
I actually am their sales director, although originally I started out as a tasting room manager, and I still chip in on that kind of stuff. If they have special events or wine club member parties or things of that nature, or just to lend an extra pair of hands when we get really busy. But I'm predominantly doing sales for them in the market. And
so how long have you been here?
I've been here about 5 years.
Now, I saw on your website that I think the first vintage was in 2006?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
When did the winery first start growing grapes or planting?
Yeah. So in about 2004 or so was our first planting. So we had our unofficial first vintage at around 2006. In 2002, Lucy Morton was brought in to decide where to do the planting. She does a lot of work in Virginia viticulture, as you know. She's the person to go to. So she's been with us since the inception of the winery.
You read my mind. You jumped the gun on me because I was going to bring up Lucy because I have interviewed quite a few winemakers and vintners around, and her name I hear it all the time.
It's ubiquitous with terroir and understanding where to plant.
Right. I know that Bordy Vineyard in Maryland, Rob DeFord was the first person who mentioned her to me.
Yeah.
About 8 years ago. They ripped up all their vines and called in Lucy.
Yep.
And had her show them what to do.
Yep.
What to do. What to
You
plant.
just missed her. She was here last week, actually.
Oh, wow. Well,
Yeah.
see, I was just telling Joan we need to get her on the show. We are going to try to do our best to do that.
Yeah.
We spoke to Carl D'Amano at 868
Yep.
about a month ago.
Yeah.
And he worked at Sugarloaf at first. And you mentioned that Lucy was there. And then when he opened his own place out in 868, he got Lucy to do it.
I don't think there's a winery or a vineyard, especially estate grown in Virginia, that hasn't had her hand on it in some fashion, either through extra advice or hands-on exactly. But she is the person to go to for that, for sure.
Yeah, I've heard of Boxwood for several years. The first time I visited here actually was probably about 2 months ago for the first time, I'm ashamed to say.
Okay.
But it was a pleasant surprise. Your estate is beautiful. The grounds are beautiful. The tasting room, I think, is unique in its design. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I know a ton about the actual structure of the building and why it was designed the way it was designed and things of that nature. So it was designed by architect Hugh Newell Jacobson. And Hugh is a personal friend of John Kent Cook, who owns the winery. And John was interested in a sort of minimalist approach to the winery. So Hugh worked hand in hand with Richard Vine, who was also hired, who is an enologist. So they worked together to try and create an environment that was in keeping with the landscape. So unlike a lot of other wineries in the area, Boxwood is sort of unobtrusive. You don't really see it kind of jumping out of the landscape as you drive up. It's actually designed to be sort of lower and compartmentalized, for lack of a better term. There's actually 4 buildings attached to this. And Hugh, in keeping with that sort of minimalist aesthetic, designed it so that everything fit with the original structure of the actual land. So that is where Mr. Cook lives. So he lives in the original estate that was originally owned by Billy Mitchell way back in the day.
Okay.
So some of the elements of the original farm were used in the construction of this establishment. So originally, Boxwood was designed to be by appointment only, to showcase manufacturing, because we're one of the wineries, there's not a bunch of us, but we're one of the few, especially on our scale, that does everything on site, from hand to stemming, hand picking, everything, right up to bottling. There's not a lot that have the sort of fancy bottling equipment that we have, which is really quite cool. And if you're sort of a packaging aficionado, and we do get people like that coming in, they look at the bottling machine and they're like, holy smokes, it's like this Mac Daddy machine that comes from Italy. So it's designed to sort of have separate buildings that don't jump out of the landscape, so you're not seeing this kind of monolithic structure. So it's set lower into the ground. As you drive up, it takes you a bit to see it, right?
Yeah, it does.
It doesn't, and so that was by design. They did that. Incorporation of certain elements to the original house. The use of the stone that you see in here is emulated after the original Virginia fieldstone that's in Mr. Cook's house. The use of stone and steel is very evocative of Hugh's aesthetic, as well as the chevrons on the doors. The low handles are designed to showcase the height of the doors. Our doors are massively heavy. We're just a little bit different than a lot of the other wineries that you're seeing in Virginia.
Yeah, one thing I like about it is the fact that most of the wineries are very colonial, I would say, in their styling.
Yeah.
Very old world.
Yeah.
And this is a great mix of like contemporary and old wood, because the stone is very much like the landscape of Middleburg. You have all those nice stone walls, flagstone walls out here. But it's clean and open, and with the steel, I think they've done a great job here.
Well, and there's all these little elements that are attention to detail. For example, the whorls on the top of the stainless steel counter, the serving space, were designed to be basically the size of the bottom of a wine glass. Even though it has this really sort of modern feel, with the incorporation of the sort of traditional elements, as you mentioned, when you look at the doors, for example, the handles, even though they're low, they're actually modeled after a traditional French lock, which is also in Mr. Cook's house.
Okay.
So it's still like an antique, it's an updated antique sensibility. And I think that they did a really good job with that. And when you're sitting in the center of the room, in the center of this round, and if you were here, it's designed to actually have a complete view of the entire establishment. So when you're sitting there, you have a view to the cave, a view to the bottling room, a view to the chai, where we do all the fermentation, and a view to the outside, as well as a view to the sky. So you see everything. The cupolas were designed because they're on the carriage house and on the stables. So he used those. So just all of these really sort of sensitive elements, I think.
Let's talk about the grapes.
Yeah.
What you do here.
Yes.
Now, how many acres is this land?
The actual total acreage, I believe, for the whole estate is about 175. We only have 25 to 26 acres under vine. And that's because that's where we can plant.
Yeah.
We're not going to get any bigger than that. We're not going to get any further afield, as far as I know. I mean, things could change unless Lucy says, oh yeah, you can plant here too. Then I think it's going to stay that. We can do up to probably, at full capacity, it'll be about 5,000 case production. We do about 60% direct to consumer here and about 40% to market. And we grow all the quote unquote noble grapes. So Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and what was the other one? Malbec.
Malbec.
And
yeah.
we also grow Sauvignon Blanc. We're into our third vintage of Sauvignon Blanc, or second vintage. And we also planted Sauvignon Gris, which is a really interesting blend. So in keeping with Mr. Cook's desire to be very traditional Bordeaux style blends, we will stick to blends. There has been discussion off and on about a single varietal, but we really like the blends here. And our white blend is actually a Bordeaux style blend with the Sauvignon Blanc and the Sauvignon Gris.
I am not a drinker of whites normally.
Yeah.
One of the things that made an impression on me is that Sauvignon Blanc that we had at the tasting room when we first came.
It's fabulous.
Yeah.
And nobody in Virginia is doing anything like it.
Yeah.
You get a lot of rosés in Virginia, and we also have a tremendous rosé. But you don't see a lot of really good Sauvignon Blanc, especially in the Bordeaux style. Yeah.
You said you do 40% direct to market.
Yeah.
I did notice some of the shops in
Sure.
Middleburg.
Yeah.
Obviously carry some Boxwood wines, but where else?
Well, to get a comprehensive look, you'd have to look on our website. But we sell in Total Wine, and we sell, I'd have to look. I was just looking it up earlier, and I should know this off the top of my head.
No, I mean, but you sell to quite a few retailers.
Yes, quite
saying.
A few retailers,
Yeah.
quite a few restaurants. I guess if I started citing them independently now, I'd be leaving out some, so that's not fair.
Yeah.
But we actually have pretty good market saturation given the size that we have. I'm very pleased with how well received it is, both in DC and Northern Virginia, all the way to Richmond and Charlottesville. You know, we're very fortunate that way. And you know, people are really starting to understand that Virginia wine is getting very, very good.
Yes.
And when I'm out on the road, I kind of evangelize about Virginia wine.
Yeah.
It's not just about Boxwood. It's about all Virginia wineries that are, I don't mind if you're not a state, as long as you're picking your grapes in Virginia, I'm all in.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that was one of the motivations to even start this podcast in the first place, because I've been drinking wine, I guess, as a wine drinker for about 5 years.
Really?
That's about it.
Oh, so you're new to the wine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as far as a palate is concerned, and
Sure.
and if any wine that I liked was a California wine, like
Right.
a California Red or a Cab or something
Sure.
like that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was educated about, well, I tasted more wine. I won't say I was educated. It wasn't until I tasted more wine, especially French wine, and then I saw the parallels between French wine and Virginia wine, that I actually saw what winemakers who knew what they were doing
Yeah.
we're actually accomplishing here.
Yeah.
And so that's what I do. I
Yeah.
tell people that if you like California Cabs, you may not gravitate toward Virginia wine, but you have to know what it is that you're supposed to be tasting
Right.
in order to appreciate it. And I think those people who do really fall in love with it.
I would agree. There's a lot, it was interesting. I was just in Napa last week, and I had a great time. But again, the wines are massively different than they are here, and I'm used to drinking, Bordeaux Reds, and I love California wines, but I love all wines. I love Italian wines, I love Spanish wines, I love Chilean wines, I love, of course, Virginia wines. And it's interesting because the terroir here is reminiscent of something that you can grow in Bordeaux, which is why it does support grape growing, depending on the size. the acreage that you have. The key in Virginia is not to get over your skis, I think. And the attention to detail that we have in our, kind of non sequitur here, but the attention to detail that we have in our vineyard, as you drove up, you could see it's meticulous. It's a beautiful vineyard. It was also planted in the traditional Bordeaux style, so not really widely spaced like you see a lot. The vines are closer together. All of our vines are certified from Bordeaux, so we're growing the real deal here also. And all of our wine is oaked in French oak for a year, up to a year. So everything is very, very traditionally done, for lack of a better term.
We'll get back to my conversation with Jessica in just a moment, but I wanted to get back to what I talked about in the introduction. I now sell Lexus automobiles at Lexus of Rockville. If you had told me in January that come April I'd be selling Lexus RX 350s or LC 500s rather than houses in Chevy Chase or in Georgetown, I wouldn't have believed you. Not at all. But that's exactly what has happened, and it's been fantastic. So I want all my listeners to know that if you or someone you know is in the market for a Lexus vehicle in the DC metro area, please contact me before you look any further. My email is in the show notes, and you can always call or text me at 301-233-2845. That number is in the show notes as well. I look forward to hearing from all of you quite soon. So let's get back to my conversation with Jessica about Boxwood Estate Winery. Well, when I visited finally, 2 months or so ago, I believe, I had forgotten that the Cook family owns this place.
Right.
Now, I'm a native, so I'm a recovering Redskin fan.
Okay.
And I remember, I'm old enough to remember when John's father bought the team from Edward Bennett Williams.
Yeah.
And those are the glory days of the Redskins.
Yeah.
I mean, when the Cook family owned the team, and and it was a very dark day.
Yeah.
When they stopped owning the team.
Yes. Yes.
And so when I was reminded that John started this place, I wasn't surprised to see the quality here because it just seems that their family has at least my exposure to the investments they've made and the things that they've done seem to have a reputation for trying to do things in a spectacular manner,
Exactly.
and I think they've achieved that here.
Absolutely.
And so what about? Are there any plans? I know that you said that you don't know about any more growing or anything, but is there anything in the future here at Boxwood that's on the horizon that you'd like to tell people about?
No, I think that they want to continue to get a little bit more exposure, into the marketplace. But again, we don't have unlimited amounts of inventory. So from my perspective, I have to be very careful of where I want to place our wine, and also in an arena where it keeps the brand elevated, right? And that's not meant to be like a snobby thing to say.
Oh, no.
But you also don't, you don't want to thin it out, I don't, I think that they like the model as it stands now. I'm not aware of anything that's, on the horizon, particularly in terms of shifting its focus or anything. I mean, the biggest shift in focus they did was in 2013 when we opened up to the public. Because originally, like I said, it was
It's by appointment.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. So when they opened up to the public, that just brought in a whole different element, which is fantastic. And it's nice to be able to share the establishment with the public.
Yeah.
We try to keep it sort of. We do, big group tastings, and we have appointment-based sit-downs and things of that nature. But we try to keep it so that everybody can really enjoy the experience when they're here. And that means we try to reduce party size. We don't, definitely try not to encourage the big party buses when they come here. Okay. And they, if they happen to come up, if we can accommodate them, we endeavor to do that. But I think most people in the Virginia wine area are pretty savvy to the fact if you're rolling in with 23 people, it doesn't matter where you go, it's going to be hard to get served.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to champion, on this podcast at least, the winemakers in Virginia and Maryland who are trying to create a quality product.
Yeah.
It's been stated to me several times by several owners and winemakers of these establishments that, you can put 5 states of Virginia in the state of California.
Yes.
And there are wineries in the state of California that produce more wine than the entire state of Virginia.
Exactly.
So, this isn't really the place to try to pump out volume
Right.
in a quality way. It's really more of a place that if you can either do one of two things: come up with produce quality wine,
Yep.
like what you're trying to do sounds like here, and,
Yep.
and I believe you are,
Yeah.
Or have an event establishment.
Right.
Very few places do both well.
I would agree with that.
There are a few, but not very few places do both well. But and I like to let the public know about the places that are producing the wine well.
Well, and currently, a lot of our wines are rated anywhere between 89 and 93 points with James Suckling, as well as our reserve just got gold in the Governor's Cup. So we're very proud of the wines that we make here. And we don't make a bunch.
Yeah.
We make 5,
Yeah.
right? So it's not like you have some, and that's the other thing too. If you like our wine, like even with the club membership and things like that, what you see is what you get. If you like Bordeaux-style red blends produced in Virginia, that's what you're getting here.
Yeah.
And you're getting a beautiful rosé, and you're getting a beautiful Sauvignon Blanc, so you have enough to sort of, choose from. But we stay with the model, which is Bordeaux. And that's the other thing, when you talk about integrity of wine, when I'm out on the road and I talk about Virginia wine, sometimes you get people, to your point, well, I can pick up a bottle of whatever for $7. Why do I want to, pay this? Now, to be fair, I think Virginia is very, very competitive, considering how costly it is to
Yes.
produce wine. Sometimes people don't understand. We don't have 5,000 acres, and we don't have that distribution. Everything is done by hand. Everything is on site. So at its nut, winemakers are farmers.
Right.
And the people that work for them are farmers, and we're employees of that farm. And I try to talk about that when I'm discussing Virginia wine. Well, people are willing to pay an extra $3 for farm to table meat, or their grocer, go to their open markets, or get their special sausages, or get, ramps, or that's not inexpensive.
Right.
So I really like to exhort people to put their money where their mouth is. It's like, you're going to do this, then drink in your backyard too. Us Virginia wineries are in your backyard. And if you don't embrace them, how do you expect other people internationally to embrace them? And one of the advantages, I think, in the Virginia area is because we all work so well together. We all support each other. So
I've noticed that.
yeah, I will extol praises about a bunch of different wineries that I think are incredibly high value that everybody should try. Not just us, but the ones. And if the nice thing is the more that happens, the more Virginia is put as a destination on the map, right? So Virginia we know it's wine country, we know all of that, but not everybody does. We're also the 5th largest producer of wine in America.
That's true.
People don't know that. It's like, what? It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're going to be a region and a destination, then it has to be a groundswell from the people, the farmers, the workers, and then the consumer. The consumer needs to embrace it. It is yours. Own it. Enjoy it. So that's kind of how I discuss it, because people say, well, it's hard to sell Virginia wine. Well, it's because you're not tasting it.
Yeah.
And you're not talking about how great it is.
Yeah.
And you can have great wines here and bad wines here, just like every single growing region in the world. So, people will say, well, I tried this 13 years ago. Well, you need to try it again.
Well, yeah, and I've told this story on the podcast before. I went to college in Atlanta, and I worked down there in the 80s. And when I moved back here in the 90s, I remember seeing an issue of the Washington Post in the style section. Might have been the weekend section. And they were talking about the Virginia Wine Tour and they had these places, and I didn't even know that Virginia produced wine.
Yeah.
And I asked my friends who were still living in the area, have you ever gone on these tours? And they'd say, oh, yeah, I went. God, it sucked. The wine was terrible. They don't know what they're doing, and all of that. And in talking to people, winemakers, people who owned wineries back then, they say, well, you know, that was probably true for some of those places back then. But things have changed radically. And so I'm just echoing what your sentiment, that I would, you know, if people had got a bad taste in their mouth, so to speak, from Virginia wine, I would say that you probably should give it another look and choose the places you go to wisely.
Sure. And the inherent passion for these winemakers in Virginia is incredible. I mean, these wineries are their babies.
Right.
The owners are, you know, everybody is hands-on.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you have, like I said, like these 5,000 acres and combine harvesters or whatever they are to do this. It's like you baby every single grape that comes from, you know, vine to table. And I think that people don't really appreciate the sheer labor and the anxiety, right, that goes into, you know, you've got to be pretty sturdy if you're going to be a winemaker here. Yeah, especially in Virginia.
Yeah, it's and also just in growing the grapes, I've learned, as opposed to say California, where they irrigate and they can have control of their climate and weather a little bit more than we have. That's changing out there a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here about weather and climate, since we talked about it. I know that last year we got a lot of rain, which affect some of the red wine grapes especially. Do you know what the outlook is for this year? Have you heard anything about that?
You know, we haven't really. We are producing wine. We won't have the same yields. That's the one thing about Boxwood specifically. I like to say if they don't like the grapes, they're not going to make the wine.
Right.
So we're just not going to arbitrarily pump out a bunch of stuff. So I think, and I haven't had any on-hand discussions, I think it's kind of a wait and see right now. But I would submit that yield would probably be lower, you know, because when you get that kind of rain, you may get a ton of grapes, but then they don't have the concentration that you need and things like that.
Yeah.
So I don't really know. I think Stéphane de Renoncourt is our consultant, and he comes from France every couple times a year. And I didn't hear any feedback yet. So, like I said, I wouldn't want to presume to.
Yeah, sure. I just was curious.
Look, hands down, it was a tough year.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're having tough times in France as well, with some of the climate change.
Yeah.
You know, in the Bordeaux region. So I understand.
Yeah. So we'll see. You know, fingers crossed. Fortunately, we have enough wine to sort of support the public. You know, going through. But I don't specifically know. But I know for a fact. It hurt everybody last year. I mean, rain on the weekend. Every single weekend it rained. Like, are you kidding me with this? So it hurt business in general. I mean, we still did well, fortunately. You know, you have an indoor structure. But it certainly put a damper on people getting out and enjoying outside. You know, get out today, clearly, because it's like one of the best days we've had so far.
Well, I would like to encourage everyone listening to visit Virginia wineries. If you have a chance, if you're in the Middleburg area, please stop by Boxwood Estate Winery. They have wonderful wines, as we have said. Jessica, I'd like to thank you for your time
and
coming to the show. Is there anything else that you would like to say? Or
no, just really drink in your backyard.
Yeah, and if you go, I will say this, if you go to one of these wineries, if you visit Boxwood and you run across a wine in the tasting room that you like, and you want to take some home, I would challenge everybody to take that bottle to a party or to a get-together or to a dinner, and don't tell anybody where the wine is from. And then ask them how they like it. And that's how I've gotten recruited people to Virginia wine. Because they'll say, oh, it's pretty good. Where'd it come from? And I'll say, oh, it's from X winery in Virginia, or some, Black Ankle in Maryland or someplace like that. And they're shocked.
I love doing that too. And same thing with, when I visit, I'm from Toronto originally. So if you catch out on that, I come by it honestly.
Okay. Could be from the Eastern Shore, though, of Maryland.
Exactly, And I've had some delicious wines from, Finger Lakes and from Canada and, all over. When in Rome, try what's there. But I do. Thank you for that plug for, drinking local, because it is so important.
Yeah.
Support your farmers, support your grape growers, your barley growers, your distillers, all of it. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, again, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And we'll be back here in a couple weekends.
Yeah. Wine Club pickup party.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, that's another show in the books. I would like to thank Jessica Chivers-Wilson for being on the show and allowing me to interview her at the winery. If you have an interest in learning more about Boxwood Estate Winery and the wines they produce, and they're very good wines, please go to their website, boxwoodwinery.com. That website is also in the show notes. And if you're looking for a scenic, enjoyable, and educational weekend day trip from D.C., I highly recommend visiting Middleburg, Virginia, and also Boxwood Estate Winery. Listen, I would love to hear from you. I'd like to hear from all of you. So if you want to contact me about the subject matter of this podcast or anything at all, please email me at hfletcher@howardfletcher.com. That email address is going to be in the show notes. Or just Google Howard Fletcher Podcast or Howard Fletcher Real Estate and Wine Podcast, and I guarantee you'll find me on the first page of Google. Something you can do that will help me a whole bunch, especially if you listen to me on Apple Podcasts or in iTunes, is to please rate this episode. Feel free to give me 5 stars, and also to subscribe. Go there. Do it right now. Do it. And if you like the show, let your friends know about it and ask them to give me a listen too. Ask them to please rate me. I would very much appreciate it, and it will help the podcast grow. And as all of you know by now, I'd like to take over the world. The Real Estate Wine and More podcast is a production of the Fletcher Group, and it's made in association now with Lexus of Rockville. Music for this episode was supplied by Cadillac Grip. If you're ever in the Boulder or Denver, Colorado areas, you got to go see Cadillac Grip play. Because if you ain't hip to the grip, you just ain't hip. The Real Estate Wine and More podcast was written, recorded, engineered, produced, and screwed up by me. I'm Howard Fletcher. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time. We are going to probably be producing these every other week or every 3 weeks instead of every week throughout the summer. Now, the spring and the summer. So look for the next one. When you subscribe, it'll come up in your feed. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.